Hello, everyone. Jess Steinbrook with FSPN, the Faith+Sports Programming Network, and I've got a special guest, DJ Dozier, who we've been catching up a little bit before going on the air, so to speak. And boys, there's some great stories here. So introduce us. I mean, we're at the Super Bowl. We're on Radio Row. Give me a little bit of your football background so that people can kind of dig in there, and then we'll go into the important stuff. How's that?
Very good. So many years ago, I was recruited by a bunch of schools, ended up at Penn State.
Wow.
And back then, that was my first year was '83. Well, in '82, Penn State won the national championship. So the recruiting class in '83 was pretty spectacular, and I had an opportunity to be a part of that. And so, we're expecting, and I was certainly expecting, to continue that tradition and have a great season, the next year in '83. Well, we had one of the worst, actually the worst start in Paterno history by going 0-3. So we lost our first 3 games.
Wow.
And then after that, we turned it around. But what an opening for college football for me and that entire freshman team. So we learned pretty quickly that things aren't just given. You have to go after it. Well, then the next year, with a lot more experience, that team, which had a bunch of young guys that played, and if you look back in history,
I'm going to protect you there. Sorry.
Oh, okay. If you look back in history, Paterno did not like to play the younger guys, especially freshmen.
Oh, wow.
I mean, you would play a little bit, but you
kind of had to you had to prove yourself.
Absolutely prove yourself, but also he just wanted to make sure that the young guys didn't have a lot of pressure on them. Well, in that year, '84, my sophomore year, we had more young guys playing and starting than in the history of Paterno football.
Wow.
And as a result, we had the worst season in a Paterno
But in 2
legacy.
years or so, it's going to change, right?
Right. So that year we go 6-5. Worst season ever, right? But here's what happened. Here's what's amazing. This is a great principle. At the end of the season, when we were asked if we wanted to go to a bowl game, we could go back to the Aloha Bowl like we had gone in '83. Almost unanimously, as a team, we decided we were not only not going to a bowl game, but in the future, the only bowl game that we wanted to play in was for a national championship. So here's a group of guys that go 0-3 in '83, 6-5 the next year, and only have interest in playing for the national, no bowl game unless it's for the national championship. So that next season, 1985, we go undefeated. And we end up playing Oklahoma in the national championship, in the Orange Bowl. And we lose. So lots of great principles there, but so we lose the game. After the game, we had a bunch of guys that were seniors, but also had one more year of eligibility.
They redshirted or something.
And so they decided, we're not going to the pros. We're coming back, and we're going to give this one more shot, put ourselves in a position to play again in the national championship. And that next year, 1 year later from that moment, we were playing for the national championship and ended up winning. What was amazing about that is a couple of things. Number one, the whole process, that 4-year process, the principles that I learned and I look back at are incredible. Practically as well as spiritually. And so after winning the championship and looking back, we realized that that process is accurate for life. But here's the other part. On that team were several individuals that had their lives dedicated to the Lord. And the one thing Paterno remembers is that on both times when he won the championship, his team, both teams, had a significant number of believers.
You'd think that would sink in over time.
Well, I think he realized that was a key ingredient.
Right.
Because, one of the things you have to have in a team is you have to like each other, you have to love each other, You have to
Good lead.
be a
Positive role models,
whole,
good character.
absolutely, and work as a team. You want to work as a team. And one of the comments from different coaches that they make about that team is they've never seen a team that liked and loved each other more than that team.
Wow.
That 1986 team. And
You guys still get together?
oh, absolutely.
Good.
Still get together.
That's amazing.
Very close relationships with a bunch of the guys.
That's so cool.
We have something to remember together that's very positive and something that affected our futures.
Well, I know you've got a deeper story, excuse me, about that, the bowl game, but just briefly take me out of college. Where'd you go with the pros? And then let's come back to the faith content that we love to talk about here.
So fortunately, I was drafted first round by the Minnesota Vikings, a team that I'd never expected to play for, let alone get drafted by. It really caught me off guard. There were several other teams that were interested and that needed running backs. And so that's usually what happens. You get drafted by a team that has a need. That's why some guys, they may drop from the second pick to the fifth pick, not because they're not good enough to be a third pick. Those teams don't need a running back or don't need a certain position. And so there was probably 4 teams ahead of Minnesota in the draft that were interested in a running back. And so I was looking far past Minnesota. I was thinking it was going to be either the Dolphins or the Raiders or San Francisco really had the most interest in me at that time because they were definitely drafting a running back.
And what year is this?
1987.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So they've got me on tape, on video, when Pete Rozelle announces the pick, my eyes, I was shocked. But as we know, things work out for a reason. And so was drafted by Minnesota, was there for 4 years, and then finished my career in Detroit in after the 92 playoff season. Well, in between all that, and what a lot of people don't realize is that I also played baseball. And that was quite a journey, especially because I was doing it at the same time that I was playing football. And not everybody agreed with me. Matter of fact, I had some teammates from the Vikings that didn't like what I was doing and felt that I wasn't committed to the team. And
maybe you're just really good.
well, the amazing part about it is all of that started when in '87, after getting drafted by Minnesota, I actually went to the World Series because the Minnesota Twins were playing the St. Louis Cardinals. And that series went to 7 games. And so all the home games, of course, and I had tickets to all the home games. And so in the first 3 games, somewhere in there, and I believe, it was a light from the Lord, but somewhere in there, I just had this inkling and this thought that I could do that I could play baseball, even though it had been since high school that I had played. And so that part is just a remarkable journey for me. I mean, my entire career was not stellar from a statistical standpoint, but the things that I experienced, the people that I met, the things that I now talk about and I can pull from those experiences, life-changing.
That's amazing. Well, back me into your faith walk. I mean, how did you become a believer? How did that start to impact your life on and off the field?
So I was fortunate enough to have a mom at home that was as solid as they get, a prayer warrior, and as obstinate as you can imagine when it comes to spiritual things and other things.
Going to church on Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Right. Oh, definitely Wednesday and Sunday. On the other hand, my father did not go to church. So, where did that put me? So I, on several occasions, thought about it, and also on occasion verbalized it, said, Mom, why do I have to go to church? Dad doesn't go. And, you know, her comment was, well, don't worry about your dad. You know, this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
And so I reluctantly went to church every Sunday. And then what happened when I was 10 years old, I went to a camp. And for the first time, I was away from my parents. And I had fun. I realized that Christians could have fun. And I thought, wow, this is great. And I literally gave my heart to the Lord at 10 years old. Didn't understand everything that had happened. But I can tell you, when I prayed that prayer, something happened to me. Physically, I started crying. And the pastor asked me, do you know why you're crying? I said, I have no idea. He said, this is God's forgiveness. He's forgiven you, and this is an expression of what's happening in that experience.
Dude, you're going to get me, man.
So here's a 10-year-old kid. But I still had that rebellion in me. You know, so over the next 10 years, even though I had some great experiences with the Lord, and I share one of them while I was in high school. I was playing football, and I was, you know, well sought after as a college player, you know, recruited. And so one of my, I guess you could call him a nemesis at the time, he just had it out for me. And so he decided, from what I understand, at his school, his team, that he would put a bounty out on me, and that anyone that could knock me out of the game, he would give him $100. Now, I heard that maybe 4 or 5 days before the Friday night game. And it got to the point where my coach even heard about it. So he brought me in the office and had a few words with me. And I remember I was a quiet kid. But when it came to football, I was all business. Yeah. And so I remember sitting in the locker room, and I was by myself. And I was praying. And I was weeping. And I was upset. And I remember I remember one of my teammates came in the locker room and said, DJ, are you ready? Because everyone was waiting for me on the bus. And so I walked out, and on the way out, there was a young lady, Carrie West. She said, hey, DJ, I heard, and she was a cheerleader also. She goes, look, I heard what happened. I just wanted to give you this note. It was a note, but it had a Bible verse on it. And the Bible verse was Philippians 4:13. You can do all things through Christ. And of course, I'm paraphrasing, but and I looked at that, and I got emotion, and I started crying, but not with her. I walked away, but I decided I was going to put that in my sock and wear it, you know, in my sock during the game, which I did, and that ended up being one of the greatest games in my career. But I played with a whole lot of emotion, if you can imagine. And so that was my one experience in high school, but I didn't carry that because it wasn't a relationship. I didn't understand. And it wasn't until my junior year at Penn State, I'm walking around campus trying to figure out what's going on, what's missing in my life, you know, and
everything else is going right.
Right.
But you still have this emptiness, right?
I had a tremendous amount of emptiness. Everything was going right, except in my mind, I came to the conclusion that I couldn't rely on football as my God, because it most certainly was. That's all I thought about. That's all I wanted to do was play football and be the best at it. And I realized that I couldn't depend on it. But at the same time, I'm walking around trying to figure out what is missing in my life. For 3 weeks, I did this. Here I am, Penn State, starting running back, 1 year away from being drafted, and lost. I walk into my dorm room, and my roommate, who was not a believer at all,
God has this crazy way of, it's almost like if you were making a recipe and you had all the wrong ingredients, right? And then you're like, I'm not eating, no, taste it. And it's wonderful, right? Sorry, keep telling me.
So I walk in, and he's sitting at his desk reading the Bible. And
Like a homework assignment or something?
right? And the light comes on. And that's not the end of the story, that's the beginning. Because at that moment, literally at that moment, the light came on for me, and I said, that's it. At least that's what I thought. I thought that was it. So at that moment, I decided I was going to pray every night, read my Bible every night, and go to church on Sunday. And so it was about a month later is when we played for this national championship against Oklahoma in the Orange Bowl. So 30 days later, we're down there and play the game, lose. Well, then after the game, we head home, meaning my hometown, Virginia Beach. And it was a day or two after being there that one of my buddies said, hey, you want to go to church tonight? And I really wasn't interested, mentally. But I went. At the end of service, my pastor starts to pray for everyone. While he's praying, I'm talking to the Lord. And I'm saying to God, I don't understand. There's something I don't understand. Why do you give me this talent, but I'm always getting injured? You know, I'm hurting. Why wouldn't you protect me? I'm having that selfish moment. Why wouldn't you protect me so I can play for your glory? You know, I'm bargaining. And then as I started to think about it, I started to get upset. And I said, God, you need to talk to me. No, God, you need to talk to me right now. Tell me what's going on. And I that's where I was. And so literally, my pastor, at the end of his prayer, says, is DJ here? Is DJ here tonight? And so there I am in the last row in the balcony. And I waved my hand.
God's calling you, man.
And I and he said, DJ, the Lord has a message for you. The Lord just spoke to me. And the Lord says that if you were as bold for him as in the sport you played, he would give you all you need. But you must put him first, and he will do X, Y, and Z for you. Put the Lord first. And so here's what happened. That moment was a revelation, because remember, when I walked into my dorm room and I saw my roommate reading the Bible, I started doing the things. And what God was saying, son, I appreciate the actions, but all I need is your heart. And so that revelation to my pastor was God saying, give me your heart and the rest will follow. And so that moment, I said, yes, God, you got my heart. And that's when I decided that in my senior year of football, that I would kneel in the end zone. So that's why when I knelt in the end zone, it was nothing to me. But then my father said, hey, millions of people saw this. And there's so many other things that happened. I remember getting a letter from a young girl that was 16 in high school. And she goes, as a teenager in high school, she goes, sometimes I feel ashamed to share the gospel. She goes, but when I saw you do that in front of all those people, I realized I need to be bold. And that's one of many opportunities. I mean, over the last 30 years almost, people have come up to me and said, I remember that moment. I remember that moment. And so it goes back to what the pastor said in God's promise. You put me first, and I'll exalt you higher than you can imagine.
It's hard when you get prophesied over and we don't choose to believe it because we don't understand it, right? I remember being on a mission trip in Costa Rica, and this Chilean pastor, and I had just become a believer like 2 years beforehand, and this Chilean pastor came up and he was just putting his hands on everybody and prophesying, and he came to me, and I'm from Philly, okay? Mm-hmm. So he came to me and he basically said, you're going to minister to the rich. And I went, and I'm like smirking and stuff. And he goes, "What's so funny?" I said, "Dude, you don't know me." Like, and I mean, Philly kid, right?
Right.
And he goes, "Son, I don't need to know you.
Mm.
God knows you."
Yes. Okay.
Fast forward 10 years. I'm at a church in Colorado. It's basically the biggest mega church in Colorado. And they asked me to speak to the men's group, and it's 400 guys of the wealthiest people in Colorado. And I get up to speak, and I had designed this whole thing, and I was super excited. And right before I get up to speak, the Lord reminds me, now remember, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm such an idiot, right? Oh, goodness. DJ, I do want to ask you, because you told me the story about the end zone thing, but we weren't really, I can come back and edit it in, but I'm not sure. I think we were just, I don't know if I was using the mic or not. Tell me the end zone story again.
So in the national championship game, of course, this is a big game. This is the biggest game of that for our team's career. You know, all the players, but certainly the seniors. And so we were not picked to win that game. And you know, as if we go back a little bit, remember that the pastor said to me that if you were as bold for him as in the sport you play, that God would exalt you higher than you can imagine. But you have to put him first. And so here's a moment at the end in the fourth quarter, about 5 or so minutes left. We're down. I don't remember. I think we were down 10-7. And play comes in the huddle. Here's what's amazing. The play comes in the huddle. And, you know, most people ask, like, what were you thinking when you scored the winning touchdown? And I have to take them back. So you have to understand, number one, that play, that formation that we were about to be in, the world had never seen.
Yeah.
We didn't know when that play was going to be called. We knew it was going to be a special play, a special time.
Yeah.
Well, Paterno decides to call that play while we're on the 6-yard line. And so the play comes into the huddle. I hear the play, and I start smiling. Because now I know that defense is not going to have any idea what to do when we shift into this formation. They're going to be perplexed out of their mind.
Yeah.
Right? And that's exactly what happened. So John Schaefer, the quarterback, says shift. Tight end shifts out, and I could see the middle linebacker's eyes.
I'm in trouble.
And he's doing this. And by the time he gathers himself, we're running the play, and it's a 46 slant to the right, in which it gives me the option to go out or in.
Wherever the hole is.
Right. Well, if you go back and watch that film, the hole on the inside it was massive because
You drive a truck through it.
absolutely. And so before I can even think about it, I'm darting toward the goal line, and the middle linebacker, all he could do is barely touch me. And I did a little spin move, but it wasn't even necessary. Scored the winning touchdown. And immediately go to my knees to pray, like I had done all year. Matter of fact, it had become so prevalent that the student section, when we played home games, the student section would go silent until I got back up. They would go silent, especially if I scored in the corner where they were.
Yeah.
They would go silent. And then when I would stand up, they would erupt. Amazing. And so there I was, scoring a winning touchdown, kneeling down in the end zone. My teammates rushed me. And so I didn't have a chance to really pray. And thank God. So I get back up. I'm shaking everybody's hand. I'm slapping and I'm hugging. And then I decided to go back down. So I go back down for just a minute. And then I got up. And what I didn't, like I said, for me, that was what was normal. I didn't think about anything else. After the game, of course, that was the winning touchdown. My father, others, but especially my father, says to me when he walks into the hotel room, he says, "Son, do you realize what happened?" And I'm saying, what are you talking about? He says, when you knelt in the end zone, it's not just the people in the stadium that saw that, but it's everybody that watched this game around the world experienced that. And then it hit me like, my goodness, you're right. And, you know, what an amazing closing of a chapter, especially after God saying, you put me first. I'll do the rest.
What a great story.